Alan Miller, you and I have been talking about the concept of digital ID for actually 5 years now. But I don't know about you, but I was shocked when Keir Starmer came out and just announced it as mandatory for everybody. The pushback from that has been huge. How did you expect him to announce it? I thought it'd be much more subtle than that.
Well, yeah, you're right, Bev, that when we actually started the fight against digital ID, it was a long time ago. We actually had a campaign called Open for All, where thousands of British venues said they wouldn't have a Papers, Please society under the guise of vaccine passports, and went on to launch the Together Declaration, where we got hundreds of thousands of signatories and supporters to say we challenge the idea of a digital ID vaccine passports. But we warned then that there would be further mission creep potentially. And even though we saw it off then, all the things we warned about are now coming into fruition with the plans that Labour have got. So it was a surprise that it was announced so quickly after Labour Together had put forward their proposal, their policy document, with the idea of a brick card that would make life so convenient and keep everyone safe and stop the boats and stop crime and fraud. And yet, when you look at this with a bit of scrutiny, you know that's not the case. But I think one of the reasons that Keir Starmer wanted to announce it, and he announced it just before the weekend, really, saying that green light would go for it just a few days before the conference, was he has his own problems, as we know, in the Labour Party, not least a whole load of people have left and they're joining a new political party. But also internally, he's faced all sorts of issues around benefits, the question of Andy Burnham, and also the questions of the Electoral Commission and funding. So maybe there was an element in which he would like to distract attention, but he certainly has done that, hasn't he? Because 2.7 million people have signed the petition saying they don't want digital ID. And we've seen that it's the level now is like minus 14% in More in Common poll of the British public who do not want to have any kind of digital ID. So whatever his intention was in terms of rushing this through, what's really exciting and inspiring is through our protests, through our challenges recently, through our campaigning at Labour Party conference and beyond, we've seen that so many people in Britain are opposed to this and pushing back together.
Because that polling, Alan, went from about 35%, correct me if I'm wrong, 35% of people in favour of digital ID before the announcement, and then after the announcement, minus 14%. I mean, I have to say, all credit to you for the work that you've been doing with the Together Declaration, not to be confused with Labour Together, which I think was a form of flattery, frankly, for you and your organisation. But all credit to you, because you've been a one-man machine. I know you've got people working behind you, but you're so driven to get this quashed, Alan. Why? What risks does it pose, this digital ID system, in the most basic terms?
In the most basic terms, this is an assault. The digital ID is an assault on all of our privacy, our freedoms, and the idea that British subjects, the British public, should be able to go about our daily business without having spies, without being treated as though we're potential criminals. And I'll give you a few examples of why that is. Firstly, we know that the whole idea around digital ID is never going to work around the borders. We have digital and national IDs in France, Italy and Germany. Hasn't stopped the boats, hasn't stopped illegal migrants. However, we do know that this government and the previous one were very keen on spying, have been keen on censoring. We know that there's been a situation where people have been arrested already for all sorts of things that they've said on posts, what so-called non-crime hate incidents, 13,000 last year. The idea of a central state digital ID system where everything is tracked, everyone is surveyed, whatever you say is being constantly monitored, the idea that we've got some kind of social credit system that you may not be allowed to rent somewhere and you won't be allowed to work anywhere without it, that children won't be able to go to nurseries, that you may be barred from going to certain areas or bars or even to supermarkets, perhaps because you've overspent your carbon footprint. We know that the current ideologues are obsessed with net zero. We know also the cancel culture has been rife. We've seen a situation where comedian Graham Linehan was arrested at the airport with 5 cops. We've seen journalists like Alison Pearson have the police come to her house. We're often not told why. The process is the punishment. But the idea that you can be shut down or switched off or just monitored all the time for what you say and what you do is abhorrent. Winston Churchill in 1952 said, we're not going to have national ID cards, we're going to make sure that Britain is free. But the current technocrats don't have any ideas for how to solve housing, how to solve employment, how to deal with the borders, what to do with education and road building or anything else. But what they do like is some good old monitoring. They like banning orders. They like stopping speech and protest. Well, some speech, of course. That's why he's called two-tier Keir. And the idea that you've got a digital system, the Bank of International Settlements has said it. The CEO there said we will be able to track every single transaction. Now let's look, Bev, at a few places where they have got digital IDs. Let's look at the case in India with Aadhaar, where they say that that system for 1.4 billion people leaks like a sieve, and data is being, data's being sold and breached continually. We've seen 125 Americans just in 2025 have their data breached in an array of fields, all sorts of areas. We've seen this in Finland, and we've seen it in the Nordic countries around IVF. We've seen it in, we're told that it's working brilliantly in Australia, New South Wales, so New Zealand should take it. But actually, what we've seen is bogus driving licenses through a corrupted digital ID that is being used. We're seeing continually a situation.
What about?
Yeah. We also see.
I was just going to say, what about Estonia, Alan? Because that's one example that keeps being used. Is people keep saying Estonia is a success story for digital ID. Is it?
Well, that's a really good question, because Estonia's just had a huge breach where lots of data has been shared and used, and they've pursued the company and the individual that's done it. So that's not safe. But we've also seen, just in the last fortnight, Bev, we've seen planes grounded in Heathrow as a consequence of what's gone on with data. We've seen a situation where, of course, 19,000 people in Afghanistan, some of them service personnel and MI6 personnel, had their data breached. We've seen a situation where Marks and Spencer's data has all been breached. We know that the idea that it's going to keep us safe, keep us secure, stop fraud, stop crime is absolutely ridiculous. What this is about is people that have got no real ideas or solutions to the major issues we're facing, the situation of how to protect our borders, the situation with our economy, and across the board. What they want is to present that they've got some kind of silver bullet. They say they did a pivot at the Labour Party conference because so many people ridiculed and rubbished the idea that it would stop the boats, because we know it won't. So now they talk about NHS digital. And of course, we know people find it very difficult to see a GP, and there's millions waiting for A&E. So they say, well, we have this digital ID and it will mean that it will speed everything up and it will get you to everyone. All sounds very nice, but it doesn't resolve the problem of resource, the problem of efficiency, the problem of execution. And of course, they don't want to have that kind of scrutiny and discussion with it. What they want to do is say, look, we've got this magical Tony Blair Institute initiative, because Tony Blair seems to think digital ID is the answer to every problem. And the British public's not buying it. And that's why at Together and the Together Declaration, we were protesting at the Labour Party conference. We were projecting images across the city. And we are flyering and leafleting all across Britain in the towns and cities. We're doing calls to action with MPs. The local elections are coming up in May. We're going to keep fighting this. We're not going to stop, and we're going to make sure that we ensure that there are some protections that we ring fence in the digital arena. And that's why we're saying there needs to be a digital Bill of Rights.
Have you had a random call lately from a strange number, maybe trying to sell you something or even scam you? If so, your info could be out there. That's because of data brokers, shady companies that scrape the internet for your personal details and sell them to marketers or even scammers. These days, scammers can even use AI to mimic your friends' voices and trick you into sending money. It's not just annoying. Data brokers often target vulnerable people with high-interest loans or sketchy offers. But there is a solution. Incogni, the sponsor of this video. Incogni contacts data brokers on your behalf and requests your info be deleted from their databases. And because your data can keep popping up, Incogni keeps sending removal requests to make sure it stays gone. They've just launched a new unlimited plan with custom removals. If you find your info on a weird website, just send them the link and their privacy team will work to get it taken down. Getting started is easy. Hit the link in the description, create your account and let Incogni handle the rest. It's risk-free for 30 days and you'll get 60% off an annual plan with the code GBNews. Take back control of your data with Incogni.
This idea that the digital ID was going to stop illegal crossings was literally trashed, Alan, within about 48 hours. The British public completely understood that was a lie and it was an excuse. What do you think the government will do now, or what are they doing now? What's going to be their pivot change? What's going to be their change of tack for the propaganda? Because they're going to have to come up with something.
I think the thing is, what they're trying to say is that now it's going to be really good for the NHS, for NHS Digital. If you want to see a GP, if you want to get treatment for medical treatment, this will be really fantastic to coordinate, speed up things, get to see someone. Now, of course, technology is always important and useful, but we've already discussed the issues with breaches in data. We know that the big tech companies who are the best at dealing with data can't prevent the millions of breaches themselves. But the question of that is also how you have resources, how you deal with GPs, how you execute that on the front line. That needs organisation. What kind of hospitals you've got, what kind of bureaucracy you've got versus frontline staff. These things don't get resolved by digital ID. They're also saying it's going to keep our children safe. We've already seen with the Online Safety Act a push towards having a biometric forcing of all the public to sign on to prove we're over a certain age. It's a complete mad moment, right, where everyone's being forced, and alongside that, all sorts of issues around free speech. In every area we look at, in the area of the idea of a digital currency, a central bank digital currency that can be programmable and you can be switched on and switched off. We've already seen last year all sorts of issues of debanking of people, very famously Nigel Farage, but all sorts of political campaign groups and individuals that were debanked largely because of their political opinions. We've seen that people have been taken off platforms. We recently had a debate that YouTube took down because it was about assisted suicide bill that the government was passing through. Now, whether that was on purpose or whether it was because of an algorithm, all these things impact it. We've seen in Portugal and Spain the electricity grid go down, loads of people cut off. How do you engage with things? What happens when net zero is a problem and you can't keep the lights on and everything's done on a digital platform? We're insisting that you've got to be able to keep analog, you've got to keep cash, you've got to be able to not have the app or the online banking, that you've got to have banks locally. We campaign with the Bank of England and the FCA for all of those things. And what we're saying, like a warrant to come into someone's house or to read their mail or to listen on their phone, we need to have protections enforced and enshrined in the digital arena. And what we're not going to stand by is a situation where we're all turned into walking QR codes. You know, they're now saying facial recognition is part of the thing. We know that the Department for Work and Pensions under Liz Kendall is saying that they're going to go into our bank accounts to check on potential fraud. All these sweeping powers by civil servants, unelected civil servants and bureaucrats, facial recognition in all our streets, all linked to a digital ID. Like when Sadiq Khan said he'd love to have tracking of cars that was trackable. Well, lo and behold, if you've got digital ID, the smart city, 15-minute city, where they're already doing low traffic neighbourhoods and fining people and stopping them going around their areas without proper consultation, that all becomes much more of a reality. You are allowed here, you're not allowed there, you are allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that. All of these things are of enormous concerns. And frankly, the state should be getting out of our private lives. They should be dealing with infrastructure, dealing with the major issues like crime, and not policing our speech and monitoring our every move.
Alan, what's this move now by the government to put every child on a digital ID? Because it strikes me that they're going to have to concede that they've lost the crowd with the adults, because unless 100% of us agree to sign up to this, I don't think it will work anyway. And as you say, if there's 2.5 million people already signing a petition that won't do it, the chances are there's more people will just say, I do not comply, I don't want to be any part of this. So maybe the whole thing falls apart. So I'm getting the impression that what they're going to do now is just go, okay, well, we're just going to have to go for the kids. And if we go for children, get them on, it becomes a normalised part of their life, and then they will be on a system forever and monitored and be a very profitable data set for someone. Do you get that same impression? There's a bill going through at the moment, isn't there, that has the risk of doing that?
Yeah, there's something called the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, and that will keep all of our children on digital ID, collecting their data and setting them up for lifelong monitoring. And it hasn't really been discussed much. They say it's going to be for safeguarding and education and healthcare, but it's a permanent digital record that keeps on them everywhere. Now, the children can't opt out or control how their data is used. So this information is really, really critical, and it's how the government sees fit to kind of deal with it. And some people may say, well, don't be so dramatic. At the end of the day, generally they just want the best for our children. Well, we've seen in the last 5 years the kind of draconian measures that can happen. We've seen that contrary to hundreds of years of medical decency, there was an attempt to mandate everyone to get a job to have a jab. We've seen that children were presented as needing jabs when they never were. And the whole idea that you can coerce or you can control or you can monitor and you can censor and look at that with children, and also that you have that and you constantly have their information and data, and that can be breached too, which leads to all sorts of issues. This is a real problem, and it's abhorrent, and it's always done around the terms of safety and safeguarding. But we need to make sure that we rigorously challenge the idea that there's this state, a biometric surveillance state that's got all of us on this centralised system.
You're no Luddite, Alan. I know that, and you recognise that we do have to move with the times. We were told, weren't we, that a banking app was going to be optional, that you'd still be able to walk into your bank. And so most of us have got the banking apps, even though we now realise the banks are actually closing. There are all sorts of ways in which we're having to adopt technology just in order to, even just the basics of parking our car and paying for the parking. So how do we get the balance right with accepting that a digitized world will make some systems, some services even, easier, but it won't necessarily make them safer. It won't close our borders down. There are all sorts of issues that we're being promised it will have nothing to do with that. But how do we get that balance right, Alan, with making sure the phone in our pocket is working for us, the individual, rather than for the government?
I think it's a very good question. It's important. Look, I love the benefits that technology can bring us: communication around the world, engaging with loved ones, doing business quickly. But what we need to do is make sure that we uphold and defend the fundamental principles around privacy and around our freedom and liberty and rights. And that means we need to have a digital bill of rights where we say these things are ring fenced. So whilst we might want medical records that are digitally able to be utilised by your GP between yourselves so they can be quickly looked at and addressed, what we don't want is a government that's got the whole system of all your medical information and then becomes something that's used to nudge and push and coerce. So we need to make sure that we've got ring-fenced areas, that we protect and defend the things that we commonly understand now as being the case. We don't want a huge Orwellian state that's able at the press of a button to get every piece of information on everyone, all the data, all the information, and say, well, they're saying this about that, or they're consuming this, or they're not quite the right type of citizen, so now this will happen. We are very concerned that those things have begun to happen in any case in the analog world with what people are saying and with protests and stuff like that. So the thing is to be practical and smart about it and say, look, we like the advances of technology. We recognise that those things are always going to bring some improvements, but we must defend and uphold the areas of privacy and freedom and liberty. And that means that we don't have a state that constantly can spy on us, survey us. We have to make sure we've got protections. And that's why we've developed a digital bill of rights to say this is critical for us moving forward. So no to digital ID for everyone, particularly mandatory. And yes to a digital bill of rights where we're very clear about the scope of what could be done by who, by companies, when we give permissions, and what the role of the state is within all of that.
Okay. Alan, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you from Washington. Keep up the great work in the UK, won't you? And thanks for joining GB News.
Thank you.